Welcome back. Southern Africa is facing a dramatic climate split, while the northeastern regions of Mozambique, Limpopo and Mpumalanga are being submerged by record-breaking floods. Knysna, the garden route, are battling a day-zero drought and devastating wildfires. The contrast is a textbook example of how climate change intensifies existing weather patterns, turning seasonal shifts into extreme disasters. Professor Jasper Knight from the School of Geography, Archaeology and Environmental Studies at Wits joins us in studio for more. Prof, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Prof, so what is this called? A climate split. In one part of our country, in some parts of our country, heavy rains, floods, devastating, of course. And then in the other part of our country, droughts and almost a day zero. How do we explain this?
Well, it does seem kind of paradoxical that we've got two totally different sort of weather systems affecting different parts of the country. But Southern Africa is really characterised by a distinctive east-west split naturally. So on the western side of the country, rain tends to take place during the winter period, and we receive much less rain than we do on the eastern side, where it tends to rain during the summer. And this is a natural pattern of weather that Southern Africa experiences, very similar to other latitudinal zones in the southern hemisphere. But what we seem to see at the moment is that this natural pattern has been amplified, and it's very likely that climate change is the cause.
Now, you're saying this natural pattern has been amplified. Can we expect it to just get increasingly worse?
Well, over time, under climate change, this is really what climate models suggest. But of course, this takes place over relatively long time periods. But what we do know, however, from climate models, as well as from observations of weather and climate in different parts of the world, is that climate change is increasing the erratic behaviour of natural weather systems. And that could well be what we are experiencing right at the moment.
When you look at, I mean, right now on our screen, we've got visuals, devastating visuals of some of those flood-stricken areas. When you look at how the South African government has dealt with the crisis in Mpumalanga and Limpopo when it comes to the floods there and the drought as well and the wildfires in parts of the Western Cape, are we prepared? Are we tackling this the way we should be?
Well, I think the government is trying to do its best, and there is appropriate legislation in place, and there is the National Disaster Management Centre that is tasked specifically with managing these types of extreme situations. But of course, inevitably, there is more that we can do. One of the key things that has contributed to the lack of water in Knysna and along the garden route is the failure of infrastructure. So this, of course, is the responsibility of the government. But this requires long-term investment and long-term strategic planning. Unfortunately, it's not something that can be solved overnight.
Oh, and when you talk about the legislation and the policy being there already, a lot of the time when it comes to our country, the implementation is where we get it wrong or where things just seem to fall apart. And you're saying there's more we can do, for instance, upgrade of infrastructure. What else should we be looking at to curb these kinds of weather patterns?
Well, predictability of weather and climate events is, of course, key, and we actually have really good weather forecasting in place. But one thing that you mentioned that is actually quite significant is that under the national legislation, it is a statutory requirement, for example, that municipalities undertake a risk analysis of the potential hazards and risks that may occur within their legislative area. But there is a lack of expertise and training and the required resources in order to do that effectively. So we have a great potential, but that potential is not able to be fulfilled for a range of reasons, and that's really problematic.
You mentioned the municipalities' role as well. We do know that many of our municipalities in South Africa are in a dysfunctional state of sort. So let's say they continue on this trajectory and we continue with this climate split as well. What do the prospects look like for ordinary South Africans?
Well, it doesn't look great, really, and this is because if we don't really address the fundamental problems that give rise to impacts upon people and communities, and this means warning systems, evacuation systems, ensuring that infrastructure is fit for purpose, and that things like roads and bridges aren't going to get washed away, as we saw there in Mpumalanga, then, of course, these things are just going to make all of this infrastructure and the resilience of the communities less able to withstand future events. And so things are going to get worse and worse if they are not effectively tackled.
A lot of the responsibility seems to lie in the hands of government. As communities and ordinary citizens, what can we do in our ordinary everyday lives to try and curb this in some way or another? And do we even have the ability and power to do that?
Well, the short answer is yes, we can actually do things. We are not powerless. So really, every single person can look after themselves, their families and their neighbours and communities, and ensure that they are informed about future weather and climate events and patterns, so that they know what to do when these events take place, and ensure that they have a plan. So even something as simple as having a first aid kit or water within your household is a good way to increase your resilience. So there's lots of things that we can do as communities.
Are there also examples, Professor Knight, around the world that we could look to try and get some sort of inspiration on how we can intervene in such circumstances?
Yes, there are. So many countries around the world tackle weather and climate events and other types of hazards in really effective and imaginative ways. So, for example, in Japan, even though this isn't a weather hazard, there is a regular practice sessions, even with kindergarten kids, on what to do if there's an earthquake. They actually teach the kids what to do in these situations. And this kind of very basic and almost sort of fun type activity that can be done at the local level is something that could be done in order to tackle the ways in which people and communities respond to weather and climate events, such as heavy rainstorms and heat waves.
And just lastly, if you were handpicked, for instance, by the government to go into Mpumalanga and Limpopo, where we see the worst affected parts of flooding, what would be your strategy to get things into place? I mean, of course, it's going to have a long-term solution. But if you got in there on Monday morning and they said, "Oh, you're in charge of this," what should we be doing?
The main thing, and this is actually enshrined in the legislation, but it never actually works, is getting government departments to talk to each other. Because with the example of floods, we don't just have communities and things like roads and bridges hit. We have impacts upon people's health, well-being, housing, food, water, and the list goes on. And these, of course, are dealt with within different government departments and agencies. And getting them to work together effectively is a real challenge. But if it's done, things are going to be a whole lot better. Yeah,
working in silos never worked. Professor Knight, thank you so much for your expertise and coming into studio to join us for this very important conversation. Really appreciate your time.